If your world is to survive, I must light the way. Because I am the shield of the people. I am Rehneyra the Chosen.
Welcome, interwebs, to A Cast of Kings, a decoding TV podcast about the HBO original series House of the Dragon. I am one of your hosts, Jessie Earl, and it has been several years since I read Fire and Blood, the book upon which House of the Dragon is based. And I am joined by the author of the unofficial guide to Game of Thrones, the one, the only, the amazing...
Kim Renfro.
Yay!
I like that I get to be my own hype man.
Yeah. I mean, I try to hype you up. I try to give you a
I'm
good...
sorry.
Wow.
You're my hype woman.
Wow.
I feel like I'm doing a... Wait, let's do that. That's me. And I have reread Fire and Blood many, many times. I should probably talk to my therapist about it at this point, because I'm not sure it's doing much for my psyche to be marinating in all of the treason and what else could possibly be happening, Jessie?
I think it's really healthy to just be like, look at all these death and destruction and everyone being treasonous all over. I'm sure it's gonna do really, really well for your social relationships in your everyday.
Not paranoid at all.
No,
like, we're doing great.
Yeah, no, you'll be at like a Wendy's being like, you have betrayed me. You shall be summoned to the High Council. It's like, oh, Kim, this is a Wendy's. I don't know what you want from
Bring me David Chen, the usurper.
I think we're the usurpers in this scenario. I think
it's
from
true.
David Chen. Yeah.
Shout out David Chen.
We love you.
We love you.
Well, today, speaking of usurpers, we are breaking down season 3, episode 8 of House of the Dragon, titled The Treasons of Tumbleton, aka the season 3 finale of House of the Dragon, which was written by Ryan Condal and Ty Mickle and directed by Andrei Parikh. Hopefully I said those names correctly, and apologies if I did not pronounce them correctly. But before we get into the episode, don't forget, if you want to support shows like A Cast of Kings, please consider becoming a paid subscriber at decodingtv.com for ad-free episodes and bonus content. And with that said, we're about to head to the Sept to make sure all know our rightful thoughts on the House of the Dragon Season 3 finale. But before we get into our full recap and review, Kim and I have a couple really exciting and really fun announcements for y'all. The first announcement is that normally our show versus book discussion is a subscriber bonus episode that we do for all those who subscribe over on decodingtv.com. But because this is the finale of the season, this week's bonus episode is going to be released right here on the main feed for everyone. And it's also going to serve as our season 3 wrap up. And with that said, we want your thoughts. So please send us all your thoughts on not only the finale, but the season as a whole over to acastofkings@gmail.com by Wednesday of this week, so that we can get those all in, so we can discuss the season overall and what you have to say about it. And we'll discuss all that later on. The other thing, though, is we have an even bigger, much more exciting announcement that I'm really, really pumped and excited to discuss, because normally, A Cast of Kings goes dormant until the next Game of Thrones project releases, which right now is looking like it's going to be A Night of the Seven Kingdoms Season 2, which just announced that it wrapped filming I think like a week or so ago, and it's probably going to be coming sometime next year. But Kim and I have been really enjoying our time together and getting to talk with each other each and every week. It's been a highlight of my week, and I hope it has been a highlight of all of yours, listeners. So we want to keep the fun going. So we, over the next few months, are going to be sailing out of Westeros over to Middle Earth. Very excited to announce this. So yes, leading up to Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power Season 3 that is going to be premiering on Amazon Prime in November, Kim and I are not only going to be rewatching and revisiting on this podcast feed Seasons 1 and 2 of that show, but we're also going to be covering all 3 Lord of the Rings films, extended editions of course, and the Hobbit movies, as well as possibly taking a few little side quests into the greater Lord of the Rings extended universe, I guess as we'll call it, with hopefully some special guests if we are able to get them. And we are going to be starting next week with the Fellowship of the Ring, because of course, where else are you going to start? But on that note, we want you to help shape our conversation about it. So, along with your House of the Dragon Season 3 thoughts, send us what you want us to discuss or your own thoughts about Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, as well as all of the movies. And those are going to be our main guides for discussion on this podcast for those films. So, really excited for all of that. Please get those emails in because we're very excited to have a conversation with all of you about it. But we know it's a bit of a change for a cast of kings, and we're incredibly excited for you to join our fellowship as we go on an adventure, as Bilbo would say. But with that said, Kim, I have been talking for a long time because there's so much to announce. Anything you want to say about our journey into Middle-earth?
Yeah, I'm just sitting over here like beaming at you because I am similarly very excited, very tickled to have the opportunity to not only podcast with you more, I also love starting my week this way. It's the best. And to get to do it, to get to dive into Lord of the Rings, which I haven't really gone on the record too much about in like any professional criticism analysis space. And yet, Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring in particular, seeing that movie in theaters when I was 11 years old, I think, maybe 10.
Yeah, I think you and I are about the same age on that. Yeah, because I haven't seen it in theaters. It's a formative experience. Yeah,
so formative, like truly changed my taste and interest in storytelling forever, and certainly was part of the reason why I entered into the Song of Ice and Fire fandom the way that I did. And so I love that there's like this connective tissue between what we've already been covering and what we are going to be podcasting about in the weeks to come. And I really hope that all of our listeners like to come along for the ride, because I truly think it's a wonderful way to continue on both like the Cast of Kings family legacy listeners, and also get to dive into a slightly different subject matter in the way that Tolkien approaches fantasy storytelling and world building versus George R. R. Martin.
Yeah, I really, really love that because I love both the Game of Thrones universe and the Lord of the Rings universe for very different reasons, even though they are very much in conversation with each other, right from George R. R. Martin's initial impetus. And Lord of the Rings, as opposed to House of Dragon and Game of Thrones, which is very realist, not nihilist, but very realist, Lord of the Rings has this very hopeful energy to it that I am very, very excited to discuss with you. And I think I need this point in time in my life, given the state of the world. And, we've talked about this. Rings of Power. It's certainly a very messy show, as is House of the Dragon, as we'll discuss in just a little bit. But it's a very messy show, far from perfect, but one that I have a soft spot in my heart for because it allows me to enter into this universe and world that brings me a lot of joy and brings me a lot of hope in dark times. So I am very excited to be able to talk about it with you. It's going to be, I think, a really, truly fun and joyous time. And I hope it'll be great for you, Kim, and for all of you listeners. But with all of that said, enough of us jabbering about that other fantasy world. We have a House of the Dragon finale to discuss. So before we get into our recap, let us jump into our spoiler-free thoughts on this episode. Kim, what'd you think of the season 3 finale? The collective sigh, like, oh, I felt the weight of that.
Yeah. Oh, I will start with what worked for me generally in this episode overall. Big highlight for me continues to be Ramin Djawadi's score. I think that the themes meaning, the pieces of music and the melodies that he assigns to particular locations or characters have just been so beautifully built up throughout these 3 seasons. And like really so much of the emotional drive I was ever feeling towards this episode was probably due to just the beautiful violins, the horns, all the dragon noises were great again this episode. Sound design. We've talked about this before, like the technical aspects of this show truly are never really like left on the table in any way.
The technical aspects of Game of Thrones as a franchise have never been the issue. They have always been top notch in the height of the industry just as a whole. And that continues for this episode and this season. So yeah. Absolutely.
Costuming was phenomenal in this episode.
Makeup too. I love Rhaenyra's Sith eyes on Rhaenyra. Oof, I love it. Style. I want to do that. I can't wait to cosplay that.
Truly many delightful details for my eyes to feast upon throughout this episode, and my ears. But my heart fared a little worse. And I left this episode feeling like bummed and frustrated in a way where I was feeling a little bit conflicted about like, okay, I understand that what is unfolding is uncomfortable to watch and is awful. And I'm not supposed to feel good about any of this. And I think one of our listeners on one of our YouTube videos left a comment that described like the show as saying, guys, this is the miserable days at the miserable factories show, or the miserable days at the miserable factory. And I think that that's true. Like, it is true that George R. R. Martin's universe is not one in which we are meant to feel very hopeful and optimistic too often. And yet I think that like the balance of where I am getting invested versus disappointed in the story is off. Like, I don't think that I'm purely reacting to being like, oh no, it's hard to see Rehneyra do terrible things. I also think that I'm having a bit of a reaction of like, I'm feeling a little bit confused, and like the show hasn't quite landed exactly what they are trying to do with all of these characters in a way that feels really like clear and resonant to me.
Yeah, and to jump over to my thoughts, I agree with you wholeheartedly. This finale crystallized, I think, my problems with not only this season, but given we're about to head into the final season of the show in however long it'll take till we get that, my issues with this show overall, because I can see what often the show is going for a lot of the time, and I can say, okay, I see what you were aiming at, but I don't think you've really fully earned it or got us there in a way that felt satisfying. And it leaves me at every moment completely frustrated, and also feeling like the writers themselves aren't entirely telling the story that they themselves told us they were telling and know exactly what they were telling. And I want to be clear because, you know, as a book reader, I have frustrations with the adaptational choices that this show has made, especially in this past season, that we'll discuss a little bit of as we get into this. I don't want to get too into book show comparisons, but I will have to address it a little bit as we discuss this. But even setting the adaptational choices aside, this show, I feel like, had set up an arc and a thematic sort of setup for this show in season one that it is kind of lost the thread on by this season, and I think ultimately leaves me being like, what are you trying to say? What are you trying to do? Do you even know what you're trying to say and do at this point? And I look at this finale and go, it's a lot of sound and fury signifying not much. I don't want to say nothing, but it is signifying not much. And while I enjoy the spectacle of what's happening here, the battle here is truly amazing. I don't think the show truly is as deep as I think it thinks it wants to be. And as a result, I'm left very frustrated and kind of annoyed at a few things that this show has decided to do. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at entering into this finale and where I go into season 4 of the show. So we're going to jump into all of that in just a minute. But speaking of disappointments and pains, there's a few pieces of news that I think we need to discuss before we get into the finale proper here, because George R. R. Martin himself posted a blog post that got a little bit of attention and news this past week. And it's a little bit of a darker one, so I'm going to read pretty much the entirety of the post. There's a little bit more outside of it, but this is basically the body of it, where he posted, quote, "This year has been stressful, to say the least. So much has been happening. It's been overwhelming. Some great things, exciting things, dreams coming true, but there have been nightmares too. I have lost friends, battled sadness and depression. The worst may be yet to come. I turned 77 last September, and I tell you, getting old is no fun. But there have been amazing times as well. I suppose that's just life. Of course, I knew that. If you've read my stories, you know that. So much to post about. I will try and catch up some, and my minions will help, but my posts are likely to be short and rushed. But one highlight you may already know. Emmy finalists for 2026 have been announced, and A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms nabbed 9 nominations. Yes, 9, not damn. For some reason, he put that in there. Including the big one, Best Drama. The awards ceremony will be Monday, September 14th at the Peacock Theater in Los Angeles. I hope to attend, but that depends on, well, a lot of things. I am proud of our team and hope we will take home a few of the statues, but I will confess that I was hoping we get a few of the acting nominations as well, but there's always next year. So an interesting post to make here, and it is worth noting that this post went up before the finale of House of the Dragon, and yet he makes no mention of House of the Dragon at all. And this post, in conjunction with the post he made 2 years ago called Beware the Butterflies, sort of signals to me this frustration that he has had with House of the Dragon and its adaptational choices on the show. So I think that that's worth mentioning. But I think the larger conversation here is that discussion of depression and sadness that he's been battling with, which he was being very vulnerable in showing. And I think it ties into the larger conversations around fan expectations on the Winds of Winter and all of that stuff. But Kim, I want to toss to you. What do you think about this post?
Yeah, I mean, there have been shades of more or less these same sentiments given by George R. R. Martin over the last few years. I certainly maintain the sort of status that like George R. R. Martin doesn't owe us anything, as much as I think it's just like a big messy tragedy that this is currently the state of his unfinished novel series, and that the adaptations have become this kind of like
quagmire for him.
Yeah, exactly. Like the fact that like the silence is so deafening around House of the Dragon, the difference that he seemed like, the different way that he seems to be publicly approaching the way that he talks about House of the Dragon versus Game of Thrones, which is always like a very delicate tight wire.
Or even any of the Seven Kingdoms in this post. Yeah.
Right. Like, yeah. It's really difficult for me as someone who's not in these rooms and in these conversations to make much of an opinion on it, other than I feel for the man. I very much can relate to and empathize with the fact that, especially in the time since Game of Thrones ended, I've gone through severe bouts of depression, sadness, grief. I don't think I've lost as many friends as George R. R. Martin did, but like I have lost friends. And particularly with COVID starting, I think like the world in general got sort of thrown into a mass trauma event that we are all still coping with in whatever way we can.
I don't think we are. I think as collective as a culture, we have not really reckoned with that trauma at all.
Absolutely. And I think that the papering over of it has just added to a lot of people's continued, whether you're in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode, you know, like there's probably something going on in your life that isn't quite settled. I know I feel that way all the time. And then I had a baby. So, you know, I added stuff. Yeah, I added like baby vortex into all of this swirlingness. And so, yeah, I think that my wish is that George continues to feel a general message from fans of his work that like, you are entitled to your grief, to living your life the way that you want to working through whatever you want to do at your own pace. And we are kind of, I think that what the fandom reckoning needs to be now is just accepting that this is a completely different beast than it was. You know, I'm trying to do the math here. 15 years ago,
something like that, yeah.
Was when the first Game of Thrones episode aired. Oh yeah, I know, because it was on my birthday, which is so funny. Me, Sean Bean, and the Game of Thrones show all have the same birthday.
All came into this world at once. Yeah.
Hence the Lord of the Rings connection. You know, it was all there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. What were your thoughts after reading this?
I mean, yeah, and just to echo your thoughts on it is, there's just been this sentiment in some elements of the fandom of like, when's the Winds of Winter coming? When's it going to be coming? And I feel for this man who has all this expectation placed upon him, has seen this franchise change around him in ways that just move beyond him in things that he has been very frustrated to see, obviously with House of the Dragon, and also getting to celebrate with, the Night of the Seven Kingdoms and the success of the franchise as a whole. But I hope the man feels like he can just live his life. Like, look, he has not given up on the Winds of Winter, and I praise him for that. And maybe one day we will get that, but I have sort of let it go. And if I get it, wonderful. If not, like, live your best life, George R. R. Martin. Go be your best self. Especially at this point in your life where I think it's always rough when you reach that stage in life and you start to lose friends and then compound the world, everything going on in the world, not just around COVID, but the world right now, generally speaking. I want the man to live his best life and celebrate his victories that he has earned, very much so, and not get truly feeling like a sense of that he has failed in some way. So
Yeah.
I wish him the best. I send him love as a fan, and thank him for everything he's given us, and just want him to focus on what makes him happy. And I think that's the best thing to say about all of this. So get those Emmys, George. You deserve them very much so.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good lead into the next piece of news that we were going to talk
Yes.
about too, which is like he does clearly still have a like enthusiasm and connection to some of the adaptation processes that are happening in his world, including this Game of Thrones, The Mad King stage play that just debuted.
Yeah, I just wanted to quick note that the Game of Thrones The Mad King stage play debuted in the United Kingdom, and they released some photos this week. I highly recommend listeners, you should go check them out. They look really, really cool. I am very pumped to hopefully one day get to see the show if it ever travels, because I am unable to get over there. But like their Iron Throne looks really awesome in those photos, and hopefully it will come to Los Angeles for you and I to go and see it together at some point. And if it does, I'm sure we will cover it on this podcast. But yeah, it's just wanted to note that looks very cool. And he was, as you and I were talking about earlier, George R. R. Martin was very much involved in that adaptation as well. So yeah, it's a very cool thing to experience. But all that said, we need to dive into the finale itself. So before we ask where in the world is Ulf San Diego, please subscribe to watch the video versions of this podcast, as well as the main Decoding TV podcast at youtube.com/decodingtv, where you'll get to see our lovely faces. But if you want to find out what a good fucking From the North is like, that was my impression of the wolves there. We're about to dive right into spoilers after this ad from our sponsors and that amazing transition. To be warned, there be full spoilers for the episode from here on out. Let us get into the episode with Kim's wonderful breakdown. In another episode that takes place in a single day, Rehneyra seems to cement her reputation in Westeros as a cruel ruler. Maester Orwyle wakes her up with the news of Aegon's resurrection, quote-unquote, and the people of Westeros turning on her. Rehneyra then goes to Daemon's room in a panic and is soothed by his focus on the Targaryen prophecy. She decides the time has come for a show of strength and sends Daemon to Tumbleton, determined to quash the Hightower army once and for all. Kim, what do you think of the start of this episode?
Really got us going with like the panic and hyperventilating right away, right? Like I like being rooted in Rhaenyra's experience of getting this news and how rattled that would make her. We got to talk, I think, up top just about, again, how much Emma Darcy is crushing the performance in this certainly in this entire series, but like this season, I think Rhaenyra has been handed the most grief, panic, anger, shame. Like
shame.
Maybe she should feel a little bit more of that. But I digress. Yeah, this was a moment where, probably due to Emma Darcy's performance, like Rhaenyra's panic, hysterical, quote unquote, like vibe felt very believable to me. Like I was like, yes, it makes sense that this is how she would react to this news. It's devastating on many fronts, like not only being caught in a lie, but again having her legitimacy challenged. The added sting of like, oh, people already know and they're already saying like he is ordained. Like, you know, it does feel like she's having a reasonable response to this. What I don't love is that like Rehneyra tends to be the only person in the castle that has these outsized that has these reactions to things at the moment. And we've talked before about how like she's living in survival mode right now. Like she's clearly not operating from like a sound and grounded logical state. But it was really tough for me to realize like at like so close up to the start of this episode that like, oh, we're doing the Rehneyra the Cruel basically storyline. The way that you can really see, and Matt Smith was phenomenal in this scene too.
Yeah, I love how delighted he was, like, ooh, yay, I get to go and destroy Tumbleton finally. Yes.
Honestly, dare I say like horny. Like like I was reading almost like when he was like, it's my pleasure to go, and like he does this little thing where he like raises his chin the moment that Rehneyra really gives the order. Like it really feels like he's like, I don't know, this like puffed up bird being like, yes, I will go slay things for you. Also interesting that I felt like I was getting a thread of like, yeah, like sexual tension in this scene that could be kind of a carryover from what the night before. Like this episode presumably is picking up the morning after Rehneyra, you know, found Daemon with Rhaena. They had this conversation in their room. He was seemed to kind of be like trying to reconnect with her, and then she goes like, I'm tired, go away, and she goes and has sex with Mysaria. And so it was jarring for me as like the watcher a little bit to be like, oh, like that switch just got flipped of like Rehneyra now wants to go all in on Daemon. Daemon is the only person who can reassure her, soothe her in this moment, and like as we'll get to in a second, she dismisses Mysaria. Yeah.
This is kind of what I was talking about in my spoiler-free section of the show crystallizing the problem for me, because I can get what the show is going for. And let me just say here, let me just do this recap here, because we have a scene right after this where Mysaria gets mysteriously kicked out of the castle on Rehneyra's orders and sent to Essos with severance pay. But Mysaria runs into Helena on her way out and warns her of Rehneyra's ill intentions. We have these sort of back-to-back sequences of like she's going to go full on with Daemon and sort of send Mysaria packing. And the point I think the show has been trying to do this whole season is that like Daemon and Mysaria are sort of the devil and angel on Rhaenyra's shoulders. Daemon's sort of like might makes right. We're Targaryens. We should, you know, show strength. And Mysaria sort of is this better angel of like care for the people, you know, show empathy and, you know, be smart and with some strategy. And this moment here in this sequence is finally the show, I think, in the finale, earning this moment of like she's going full Daemon, full as the behind the scenes of the show seems to frame her, going full fascist, which is the phrase that the showrunners themselves use in the behind the scenes after the show.
Interesting.
So many things to kind of crystallize with that. The first of which is I don't think they fully earned this decision, especially as you say, like literally last episode, the end of last episode, we have her going to Mysaria, and then all of a sudden she's switched. And again, Emma Darcy is portraying this so well, but I get frustrated at the way that this show has portrayed Rehneyra as this sort of emotional, like hyper emotional and reactive person, because it plays into a sort of sexist trope around women, around, oh, when they become leaders, they're too emotional, they're too oversensitive, they're too flighty, they get their periods, which the show literally had a bit here, but you hear people saying like, well, what would happen if a woman leader gets her period during an important decision-making moment? What that will affect things, like these sexist narratives that we tell about women. And the show kind of seems to be playing into that in a way that I don't think was intentional by the writers, but ultimately does come across as how they're portraying Rehneyra. And not that I needed Rehneyra to be the perfect ruler and completely competent. Didn't want that nor needed that with the show. But the way it has portrayed her has just been making bad decision after bad decision, mostly based out of emotion, mostly based out of like grief over being a mother, which again, understandable, but plays into these sort of misogynistic tropes. And it cuts across what I think the show was trying to say, even in its first season, which I think is its best season, which was this idea that like Rehneyra was just dismissed out of pocket because she was a woman. And as a result, this whole war occurs because people just cannot accept a woman ruler. And, it's not to say that she wasn't able to take on that role. It's just her womanhood was what people dismissed her as. And again, what was interesting to me with the book, without getting too much into the book show comparison, is that book Rehneyra was not the most competent either. And certainly has many, many issues that the show kind of touches upon as well, but that she was just handed a terrible hand by her father and by the situation and everything, and all these plotting going on, that she would never have been able to do it well, even if she had been the most competent decision maker. Mm-hmm. And so, I found that to be very interesting, but the show here just sort of makes it feel like, and I see this in the fandom and the discussion on the show, is like, oh wow, she's just a terrible decision maker. She's horrible at this job. And I'm like, yeah, she's not great at it, but I wish the show wasn't leaning into this sort of misogynistic framing, and having her come in at the top of this episode, hysterical, as you say, and having a panic attack plays into that. And it plays into this dismissal of Mysaria for reasons that I couldn't even really understand. And I get that the show is being like, okay, she's going with the might makes right choice with Daemon. But even the show kind of seems like to understand that dismissing Mysaria makes kind of no character sense at this moment, because we have one of the servants literally say, I don't understand why it's happening too. She literally says to Mysaria at one point. And I'm like, yeah, neither do I. The show just did not earn this beat to me. And it's like, I get that they've had this back and forth of Mysaria sort of being like, here's the strategy, and Daemon's being like, be strong. But it does not make sense for a character level on Rhaenyra's part at this point, especially given the end of last episode. And given that they sort of frame her as this emotionally choice-based creature, it kind of plays into that with this choice to just dismiss Mysaria out of pocket. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, I find the fact that Rhaenyra has seemingly just been waffling between these two choices all season, and I'm like, I wish that, to me, adapting Fire and Blood in particular, and adapting this section of the story, and as you say, laying the groundwork the way that Ryan Condal did, and I think credit to Miguel Sapochnik too, was pretty heavily involved with season 1, but this idea that the history was giving the idea that Fire and Blood's account of what happened during the Dance of Dragons was in of itself a misogynistic text.
Yes.
And that there was more nuance or depth or straight up alternative ways that things unfolded. I do feel like at this point that we're in season 3, I'm finding myself being like, oh, but now you are just straight up doing Rhaenyra does mean and cruel things to people and shoots herself in the foot type of narrative, which, right, I am finding that frustrating to watch, whereas I thought that I was getting on board with a version of Rhaenyra who, yes, is imperfect, yes, has her own blind spots and everything, but is not this unfeeling, callous type of ruler that this episode is letting me know she is stepping into that by choice.
Yeah, it's on a dime. This whole season they've had, and I'd not dislike the thematic idea of it being, oh, power corrupts you. Corrupts you. And so I think that is a very interesting concept that we've sort of had with Alicent sort of charging Rhaenyra with this season, but it just happens on such a dime, and the way that it's portrayed is look, when she's being emotional, she's making dumb decisions, and then the other choice that she gets is just to go full fascist, which I just want to at least say here is my frustration with the show is that, like, look, I'm a super leftist anarchist. I've talked about this on this show. You can find my political thoughts elsewhere on the internet. But like, not every form of authoritarianism is fascism. And as much as I think we need to talk about fascism in today's day and age, given the world right now, I think it is a very simplified political understanding to just go, she's a fascist now. And it bleeds out into the simplified way that they write her in this episode of like, now she's just gone full fascist, so she's gonna not care and be all about like, I have lineage and, you know, this is my right and all of these things that just feel, again, super simplified in her characterization and super simplified in understanding how authoritarianism functioned within a feudal style environment that this show is portraying. That like still could have echoes of what we talk about with power and how power corrupts and leadership and authoritarianism to today and the fascist world we see coming right now, but does not play correctly here and just limits her character in a way that feels frustrating. So
absolutely.
Well, speaking of cruelty to others, Bela questions Rehneyra over how Lord Corlys's capture and maiming will be addressed, but both Rehneyra and Alan seem to think Corlys in some way deserves to be a prisoner right now, or at least brought it upon himself, and they have greater things to focus on. When Bela protests against his callous treatment of her inner circle, Rehneyra grabs her face and calls her an insolent child. So yeah, we get this little beat here, and again, it kind of ties into what I was just discussing for me, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, Kim, because it's again not unearned completely here, but it is weird to me that this show kind of portrays Rehneyra as being unnecessarily cruel for not caring about Corlys here, when like there are greater things to be discussed here, and it sort of like has Bela being like, you use people, you don't see people as human beings, and it's like, yes, that is an aspect of power, but I wish there was some nuance in this understanding of like, yeah, but like she has to focus on the greater thing and not like getting Corlys back necessarily in this moment, in a way that I think like if it had been another character in like the Game of Thrones show, in the original show, we would not have gotten that this sort of sense of like, oh, she's being hyper cruel because she's not trying to get back one prisoner. You know what I'm saying?
Totally. And like, I also felt like the purpose of this scene was to show how Rehneyra is now in a headspace where the moment anyone questions her, they are like dead to her, and she's put into a rage, because really it's when Bela says like, it's your fault, or like, it's your fault that he's there, that like Rehneyra literally cannot accept any amount of criticism or blame. She's that fragile, and that her only instinct is to lash out and, you know, just further oppress or dismiss or neglect the people in her inner circle. And yeah, it is, again, like these are sort of these mounting choices that the adaptation has made to really isolate Rehneyra from everyone in her inner circle and family, in a way that, like, again, the text is vague enough at certain points and doesn't get into like the headspace of so many characters that it's not even like, oh, they made a choice to do this. It's like there was a lot of blank slate here around how Rehneyra feels about all of the people in her court and her family. And right, the fact that what's getting put on that slate is like dismissal, abuse, neglect, like on pretty much every count. Yeah, is just, it's tough. And again, I find myself sitting here being like, I don't want to be the type of show watcher who's like, I can think of a bunch of other things that they could have done instead, or like, you know, why didn't they do XYZ thing? But yeah, I think it's like the repetitiveness that is getting to me. It's like that almost every interaction she is having with people ends similarly. And then the next time she sees them, she has kind of the same conversation or conflict again, without a ton of like, okay, this person's going to do something different with that information, or Rehneyra is going to try a different strategy. We're just kind of watching her like bump into the same cruelties over and over again. And yeah, I genuinely like I flinched a little bit when she grabbed her face. Like that did feel like a moment to me of like, oh, what the show is doing is putting me, the watcher, and people who've been listening to this podcast the whole time know how Team Rehneyra I am. Like I have really up until this season rarely questioned much of her actions or like found a defense or like, well, this has just happened and blah. And like this is the episode where I was like, oh, I can no longer defend these choices. Like I, as someone who likes this character and has been wanting to see them succeed and break the wheel and innovate where they can, like I kind of feel like I have to concede that she is now doing things that to me feel pretty unforgivable, including putting hands on her stepdaughter and a princess of the realm. And like, again, just the fact that Rehneyra has now become this character who's just going to inflict the same pains upon everyone else is like, it's not the version of this civil war that I was hoping to see. It just doesn't. Yet I'm like, oh, does that make me a sweet summer child?
No, I just don't think it feels like entirely believable. Again, it's just a flip switched, I think, in her character that feels very odd to me. And again, we were talking about like this is the misery show from the miserable factory, you know, that the YouTube commenter mentioned. And it's like, yes, I get that. I think we're supposed to think that everyone here is just awful and making bad decisions based on their pursuit of power, but I just don't get invested in these simplified character dynamics. And it's hard to sort of watch a character like Rehneyra, who the show got me invested in season 1, but through the struggles that she faced. And yes, she was pompous and egotistical even back then as a child. And you can sort of see a connection from point A to point B here, but it just does not feel like there's been gradations of this character in a nuanced way. It's just sort of been like, oh, she's hysterical mother and now full fascist, you know, and just sees people as like people to be used and just tossing people around. And it kind of plays into later on, Rehneyra's trusted servant, Elida, warns her about Helena still refusing food, but the queen is more concerned about getting anointed by the High Septon. When she does eventually go to check on Helena, the conversation goes south. Helena can sense Rehneyra's inauthentic attempts at placating, and the older queen lacks patience. She ends the meeting by having Helena held down and force-fed. So yeah, what did you think, Kim, about this Helena sequence?
So well performed, and I think like well written. I thought like the dialogue was incredible. I was like very riveted about exactly how Helena was going to be pushing back or how she was like getting into Rehneyra's head. I thought that was really effective. I found especially upon rewatch, Rehneyra starting the conversation by being like, "You cannot think I would harm you," was like so telling to me, because I'm like, you literally have the soldiers about 10 feet behind you ready to force feed her. Like, again, this is a Rehneyra who is so out of touch with what her actions are actually, like the implication behind her actions, the emotion behind her actions, the impact. And I really did like Helena calling her out on saying, let's see, what did she say? Do you think life is nothing more than not being dead? Really trying to get at Rehneyra that like, you have this idea that just because you're not beheading me means you are treating me well. And it's like, no, you're not. You're literally torturing me in various forms, including just keeping her shut in that room, which we'll talk about the room more when we get to the very end of the episode. But I've been dwelling upon this because they included this line of Helena asking, like, when she first found out she was getting confined, like, please not this room. And I remember being like, I wonder what was that foreshadowing at, aside from what we see unfold in this episode, or what was that getting at? And part of it, I think, is also that is the room where she brought Jaehaera, like that. Alicent was once living in that room, right? So that was the room where after Jaehaerys was killed and Helena was just like running through the castle with Jaehaera trying to find safety, and she went to Alicent's room and she found Alicent and Criston Cole having sex. And I'm like, man, like that's a very valid reason to not want to be in this room, foreshadowing aside. yeah, so the way that Rehneyra is just ignoring what seems to me like incredibly like authentic and earnest and like direct pleas from Helena and direct like conversational points. Yeah, I was just adding to my overall like, oh, like Rehneyra is really losing me here.
Yeah,
In so many ways.
Yeah, I will say this scene was probably one that I liked the most, despite it being the most like overtly cruel thing that Rehneyra does, because the writing was so wonderful for Helena's words about like there's this beetle that feeds on these the things of others, and it's beautiful, and Rehneyra trying to placate her, and she's sort of seeing right through that. I thought was a very well performed and a wonderful scene for Helena, especially considering it's probably her last major sequence in this show, given where this thing ends with her. So yeah, I think of all the scenes of Rhaenyra's cruelty, this is the one I think that felt the best. And I have issues with the treatment of how the show has treated Helena, as we'll talk about later on, I think a little bit, and maybe perhaps more in a bonus episode. We'll get even more into that discussion. But this sequence itself was, I think, very, very well handled. Speaking on this point, though, one other thing I want to just quick touch upon is we have this dynamic between Alan and Adam, and it's weird to me because Adam goes and confronts Alan about, oh, why are you on full team Rehneyra? You seem to be power hungry. Alan at one point, I think, even says that I'm the once and future Lord of the Tides, sort of an echo of the once and future king Arthurian legend in that wording. And it seems to me to be coming out a little bit of Alan being power hungry and having this love triangle now with Baela, and him kissing Baela, and so Adam sort of being like, oh, we can be free and not be tied to power. And I don't mind it on paper, but this love triangle aspect of this has come so out of left field within the show, I should say, specifically, and feels not super drawn out. And Alan sort of becoming this also power hungry person does not feel like it has been fully and completely earned.
Yeah. This was like the very first episode that I feel like I got any shades of like ambition or blind loyalty from Alan's character. If anything, I feel like up until this point, and even in the small council with Rehneyra, he wasn't like, oh, I have to do whatever you say. He was trying to kind of like speak up, actually strategize.
Strategy.
Yeah. Like
proving himself.
Exactly. So it felt to me like, yes, that Adam coming in at this moment to be like, hey, just so you know, the queen is now on a pretty dark path, and like we shouldn't trust anything that's going on with her, or like, I don't, he doesn't say that exactly, but yes, it did feel contrived to then like plant the idea with us that Alan is somehow, that yes, he is being a little too ambitious, or yes, he is being a little too like blindly loyal in the lead up to the killing of the High Septon. That I felt like I was like, oh, you're just introducing this idea to us, and then you're just having Alan try to contend with it. And I truly found it baffling that like, why include the kiss with Baela, no other scenes afterwards, and then have Adam tell Alan, did you know Baela's been effectively like imprisoned inside the castle, and have him just be like,
yeah, sure,
no, like no reaction. I found that whole scene to be a little bit odd.
Yeah, it's like I can see what the show is trying to do on paper, and on paper I don't hate it, again, of this like draw to power, but it just hasn't earned it. And it's consistently that problem, like the stuff with Imsaria and Daemon, like it didn't, like I see the idea, but I don't see the through line. I don't see the A to B to C. Like I see the A and I see the Z, but I don't see the like B, C, D. Like I don't see the in between parts, and it just sort of been this like mangled knot of like vague scenes gesturing at these ideas all season, and then now we've gotten to the end. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that what happened, or that what I feel has been happening is, we're maybe experiencing the impact of only having 8 episodes versus 10 in some ways.
Yes.
And yet within these 8 episodes, it does feel like really only a handful of storylines were like really dragged out. But then there's a lot of to me, and this came up to me a little bit in the Bela scene too. There's a lot of like, we're just telling you what's going on directly, like character to character. Like when she says like, you only wield us until we're not useful to you, like you discard us. And I was like, well, yeah, you also like just said that in a scene a couple episodes ago with Adam. And it's like, oh, we're getting a little bit of these like exposition character moments versus feeling the nuance of the character shifts.
Yes,
and I also wish that like Adam suddenly being a little bit more doubtful of Rehneyra wasn't tied to his seemingly like feelings for Bela and any jealousy there. I don't know. I think that Adam was already a pretty cool character in a like from the way that Sea Smoke claimed him, the way that Rehneyra always kind of seemed to favor him or not dig into him as much as the other dragon riders because she saw him as like a sign from the gods type of thing. To me, those are all much more interesting layers of like a character to dig into versus I'm jealous that my big brother seems to be getting the girl. And again, I like Bela. Yeah,
Bela just as an object to be used kind of in this storyline is odd to me. It's kind of the stuff that I spoke about with Reina as like an object as a storyline for Daemon and Rehneyra's angst last episode. Well, speaking of which, Rehneyra believes forcing the High Septon to anoint her in front of the small folk will solve her legitimacy crisis, so she orders Alan and the Valyrian soldiers to form a guard that will bring her from the Red Keep to the Sept on the other side of King's Landing. We already talked about Adam arriving. And so let's kind of talk about this whole stuff with the Sept here, because she basically goes there, she confronts the High Septon, and basically like, oh, this is treasonous. Our gods are more important than yours. Has Alan kill him, and again playing into this idea of Alan having this desire for power of like, our gods are higher than yours. We also get to see our little Joffrey, right, is her kid's name, right? He just appears finally. He woke up from his long nap. And then she gives a speech after killing the High Septon to the people that is essentially the prophecy of the prince that was promised. So a lot to discuss here, and I kind of want to do this here before we get into our Tumbleton discussion in just a minute. Like, what did you think of all this stuff going on?
I continue to not really love the way that the prophecy has been introduced to this story in general. Again, not trying to go into it too deeply, but this is a thing that we would have talked about way back in season 1. But yes, this idea that Rehneyra and Daemon are primarily motivated by a prophecy given to them by Viserys that we, the audience, know has a ring of truth to it, leaves me feeling, very kind of nonplussed about any of the tension that they try to bring up within it. But also it's a little baffling to me that they made the choice to have her like just say the prophecy to a bunch of people in King's Landing. Because again, like in universe, this prophecy is not well known. I suppose it's feasible that like all of these people didn't really understand what they were hearing, didn't really remember it. No one really cares. There are shades of like that Rhaegar Targaryen in the far future, again, Jon Snow's father, that he somehow became aware of this prophecy through like old, long buried records and stuff like that. So like, it's not completely out of pocket to have her be talking about it, but it just, again, was like, felt like a heavy handed way to give her, to deal with it and to give her a big disconnect from the small folk and like have her again truly be out of touch with how communicating her decisions or communicating her belief in her own legitimacy was just a really bad strategy. I thought it's funny because I for a second I thought that she was going to kill the High Septon earlier in the season
earlier,
when they were just by themselves in the throne room. So I wasn't entirely surprised that that's where we landed here. I did think that her having Alan do it and egging him on with like, oh, don't listen to him, like, you know, those aren't your gods. You're also of like the blood of old Valyria.
And giving legitimacy to him, I think like that works a little bit too, because it's like finally that he gets what he wants to a degree.
Yeah. I more than the prophecy stuff though, I was left feeling pretty disappointed that this is where we're seeing Joffrey reintroduced. Without, and like he doesn't have any dialogue that I remembered. He's not like expressing very much. He's just kind of there absorbing all of this from Rehneyra. I found it to be a pretty poor payoff to the scenes earlier in the season that we saw of her seeming to be conflicted about being with him when he was awake. Again, I'm like, I feel like there are so many more interesting things that we could have seen happen around her reunion with Joffrey, that to have it just be in this very like cold and, you know, public facing manner, I was like, again, this is another one of these times where I'm like, I know that I'm supposed to feel disappointed that that's how Rehneyra is engaging with her children, but I'm just like,
there's no sense of like the what could have been, you know what I mean? I think that's what it is. Like usually when those moments of like, oh, I feel disappointment that she didn't get the chance that she wanted. Usually you have a sense of, oh, what could have been, what for the knot of fate. And we don't really get that sense here because Joffrey's been a non-entity this whole season. He is an object, a piece of the set dressing rather than a character. And I think that's why I don't have any emotional impact on this. I just think I think that he could have been incorporated back into the story much more effectively, and instead yes, very much. And again, I get that that's what Rehneyra was doing, was using him as a prop in many ways. That doesn't mean the story has to treat him
reinforce
that way
it.
And it cuts against what they want to try to say with that. And it's like one of these things where it's like I would say the writers of the show are using a kind of Doyleist excuse for a Watsonian failure, if that makes sense, of like they're explaining like, oh, this is how Rehneyra treats her kid, but it's like, okay, yes, that's like in universe true, but the show doesn't need to do that as well, and ultimately makes us not feel it as much as for the point you're making. Doyleist and Watsonian, for those who don't realize, sort of refers to Arthur Conan Doyle and Watson from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes books, and Watson, the character in the story. So if you have a Watsonian explanation, it's an in-universe explanation versus a Doyleist explanation, which is a out-of-universe explanation, to sort of give a quick explanation what I mean there. And the only other thing I'll add, because I think you kind of hit all the points that I would make, is it's weird to me to have her give this speech to the small folk and like deliver it in High Valyrian at the end of like, I'm the prince that was promised. So like there's some weird gender stuff here that's kind of interesting to me about like, oh, she sort of sees herself as the prince and is sort of like claiming sort of a masculine title. That's fascinating, but it's, again, very superfluously done. And then like delivering this in High Valyrian that like no one in that crowd is going to understand really at all. And so it's like, what are you talking about, lady? And so it's just like it seems to be performed more for us and to give us, the audience watching the show, is like, look, she's crazy now, than for like anything that the characters in the universe would understand or get or desire. And again, it goes into this framing of like, oh, she's the Mad Queen. She's just gone off the deep end now because of how emotional she's been. And it reminds me again very much of the terrible treatment of Dany's character in Game of Thrones, where it's like, I can buy that Dany at the end of Game of Thrones would go into this sort of like, I deserve this, I'm Targaryen, I deserve the right to rule mindset, but it's just done so quickly and at the flip of a switch that it doesn't feel like it's earned. Same thing kind of happening here with Rehneyra, and it seems to be doubling down. And again, the figuring of her as like a fascist style leader, when again, like,
She's a monarch.
She's a monarch.
She's a monarch. Yeah.
Yes.
She just happens to now be choosing to wield her monarchical powers in a pretty brutal way, but
Yes.
like that's baked into the system that she's
of like the divine
within.
right of kings, and like again, there's conflict here between like which gods they're following and her sort of throwing down the septons, but it just doesn't land very well. It doesn't seem to understand the nuances of like monarchical rule in this era of like, yes, she has to appease the small folk, but there would be a little bit more acceptance of this idea of, I don't know, like, oh, they're above us sort of thing. You know what I mean? Not even necessarily in a religious sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I also think it's interesting that the show has set up the Hightower side of this conflict / Hightower Targaryen, to like have much more infrastructure basically around like their religion, but also like their campaign for the throne. Like again, the fact that Rehneyra got the news of Aegon's return, not because like, oh, one guy just got back from Rook's Rest and he's letting you know, but like already at this point she knows that ravens have been sent out, that like messengers are spreading the word. And I'm like, right, where are Rhaenyra's messengers? Like, we'll get into this more with like Tumbleton, but like, is it not possible in this world that like Team Black could also have the same, like, be able to deploy propagandists, right? To say like, hey, did you all know Ormond Hightower just used children as human shields? But somehow within this universe, we're meant to believe that nothing the Hightowers do that's cruel ever makes its way out into the public, but everything that Rhaenyra does or everything that works against her is somehow getting disseminated and spread around, which I think is like, I do like this idea again in this universe that like we don't have phones, we don't have internet, we don't have digital pictures that everyone can share. So how many people you're able to literally in person convince of your campaign, or whether or not you are famous enough in this world to be visibly recognized by someone who's never met you. Like, I like when that plays into the story. I don't love that it seems to be just like, oh, Rhaenyra forgot to develop any of those pieces of her court and her strategy to rule.
Especially
and instead,
Mysaria should be that person to do that. Yeah.
Exactly. And then the fact that Mysaria is in the crowd for this scene, I was also like, oh, pretty convenient that she just like hopped off her wagon and is fine. But like, Mysaria doesn't actually get on the ship and instead is there watching this. And the expression on her face kind of seems to be like, oh, I'm watching you fuck up. Like, I'm watching you make a mistake by calling yourself Rhaenyra the Chosen. I think Mysaria speaks Valyrian, so I think it's also interesting that like, oh, the only person in that crowd who could understand
is Mysaria.
Speech is Mysaria.
It seems to be setting up a heel turn for heel may be the wrong word, but like a heel turn for Mysaria here in this sequence. Because even behind the scenes, if you listen to behind the scenes, the actress is like, oh, she's seeing this person that she loves go full fascist and realize that she went wrong, and so it's like, oh, so they're setting up her for her to become an enemy of Rhaenyra next season, which again feels just like heavy-handed and weird to suddenly do that, because like weren't like last week the sex workers calling you out for being on your high horse? And it's like, I get that would have her question stuff, but it just doesn't connect super well in a weird way for me.
Right. And like to really turn what feels to me like every character, at least every like character who's a player in this version of the Game of Thrones, be pretty morally bankrupt, sucks.
Yeah.
Like, at least I feel like at least for the run of Game of Thrones, we had the Starks.
Yeah.
Like, we had Jon Snow, and almost all of them, until they died, unless they didn't, because a handful survived, were like almost always determined to like course correct Westeros back into being,
noble or something.
Attempting to to form the world into a slightly more just and fair and honorable place.
We also had
And
characters
yeah,
like Tyrion too. Well, he wasn't honorable per se, but he at least had a moral center that like other characters in this show, like there's gradations of morality in Game of Thrones that this show seems to just not have. Everyone's just sort of morally ambiguous to gray. You know what I mean?
yeah, and like we'll talk more about this once we get fully into the meat of the
Tumbleton.
battle. But right, like to have Missaria just in the last handful of episodes go from being someone who seems to be working for a greater good to get kind of outed as someone who's more in it for themselves, and then now seems to have full reason to turn against Rehneyra. Also the fact that like Missaria's last words to Helena might have been like the nail in the coffin, pun intended, because like she, for whatever, like again, the show gives Missaria this private-ish moment with Helena where like the last thing she says is like she'll never let you go, like just rips all the hope out of Helena that this situation might ever get better. And then then the fact that like later in this episode we're also seeing a lot of the River Lords and the Northmen not really care about if they kill civilians or not, or like that they find that directive that
sounds boring to me. Is like one of the characters that says like, okay.
And I was like, oh man, none of you are really gonna like stand in any sort of values other than yay war and death and like grabbing power for the people that we think deserve power. I think that also added to my frustration.
Yeah, it's like not that I needed like the Grey Wolves who are associated with the Starks to be like the noble Starks of Game of Thrones. I actually like that we're seeing some distinction from them between like the Starks as sort of a noble house. But yeah, it is just sort of like, oh yeah, no one gives a shit. Okay. Well, let us get into the last section here before we get into the Tumbleton of it all, which is in Harrenhal. Aemond and Alice bond over their shared loneliness. Aemond's torment comes from his guilt over trying to kill Aegon and the fact that his mom wants him dead, while Alice reveals that she's over 100 years old and has been cursed to stay alive within the land surrounding Harrenhal. But suddenly Aegon crashes the love and lore fest, telling Aemond he must help him reclaim the throne if he wants redemption. So a lot here. I guess I'll start us off with the Alice and Aemond stuff here, which is I don't care again. It is, I think you texted me this when we were talking, which is like, this is just lore without any emotional tether. And it's like, all right, we're getting a lore dump and that's fascinating. Okay, cool. There's some magical, mystical stuff, but I've just not cared about these characters all that much. And to sort of get this beat is like, okay, it is interesting to me that as soon as she reveals like, no, I'm a grieving mommy even more than you thought. And then Aemond's me like, let's kiss. Because it's just my Oedipal, you just turn on the Oedipal, element of me all over again. But yeah, what did you think about this reveal with Alice Rivers?
Yeah, but like literally when the scene kind of cuts to her face turned away from Aemond and she's crying, I was kind of like, why is she sad? Like I was like, oh, she's telling us a story here. And I suppose I felt a bit of a tug of the heartstrings when she says like, and when the boy finally died, she tried to go with him. And I was like, oh, okay, like here are the, suicidal ideation, if not, active suicidal plans coming into the theme of this episode right when Helena is also in the thick of it. But yeah, I was kind of like, wait, why are we finding this out now?
Feels like it should have come like a while ago to like really get invested in her a little bit more. It's like 2 seasons of this, you know what I mean?
Well, right. And it's just interesting that Alice has been a character who like that her motivations seem very hidden from both the audience and all of the characters that she's interacting with. So I thought it was, I don't mind the lore drop in of itself. But yeah, I found it hard to believe that Aemond would accept it so quickly and like not have many further questions.
Mm-hmm.
Not show any ounce of like, wait, what? Like beyond like that was 100 years ago. And then she was like, yeah, it's a long time. And he was like, come here,
Yeah.
give me a kiss. I'm gonna marry you. I don't know. What I did like about it was that it did give a bit of explanation as to why Alice has been so obsessed with getting one of them to stay at Harrenhal with her. Because my understanding of what she's saying is like she literally cannot pass the boundaries of like these certain river lords that were around when she was cursed. And so I'm like, oh, that's why you want this to be the seat of power, because you literally cannot go anywhere else in the realm. You can't go wield your influence or your wishes anywhere else. It needs to all happen here. But yeah, it didn't totally work for me. It reminded me of when Melisandre takes off her necklace in like season 6 of Game of Thrones and like, bam, oh my God, she's an old lady. And then like nothing, you know,
it's like,
that didn't really mean anything.
Yeah.
I guess it's interesting to know that there's 2 of them, or like that 2 characters at one point have been granted with like really long life or some sort of glamour magic that keeps them looking young. But yeah, it was kind of for this to be the culmination of both seasons of Harrenhal stuff was a little lackluster for me.
Yeah, it just seems like the show wanted to set up a like third power dynamic. So we have Ormond, now we have Aegon and Aemond as like a second group, and that of the Greens, so like Greens 2.0 versus Daemon, Ormond, Gwaine stuff, and then the Blacks. So it seems to be setting that up. So we have distinct camps, but this is the least interesting, as just sort of been pittering about. And so yeah, now we get reasoning for why she wants to be this way and why she was manipulating Daemon as well, but it just doesn't fully land to me. As a lore dump, it's interesting. I love Children of the Forest stuff. Like, I always found that fascinating as just an influence on the world. So I like it as a lore hound, but as a story, it doesn't land. So the last thing with this little bit that we have to do is we have to talk about Tom Glencarney's amazing acting in this bit, where he comes in, lands, and confronts Aemond. I love how Aemond is like, "Oh, this is another hallucination," and then Aegon just like slaps him and is like, "What?" And he's like, "I'm alive," which I've been loving that the internet has just been adoring that delivery. Tom Glencarney is clearly hamming it up and having a ball, and it's a joy to watch. So all of that's great, and this confrontation between these two, and the sort of the reconciliation, and Aegon sort of wanting this moment of catharsis with his brother, and his brother sort of being like, I've been having weird drug dreams and mommy feelings. I realize I've been a piece of shit. So and that sort of being anticlimactic. And I think that's let me put it this way. In isolation, this sequence I actually really liked. Tom Glencarney's having a ball. I like this sort of confrontation between these brothers that isn't like a big fight between the two of them, but it's actual like, oh, Aemond has sort of realized the problem and wants to be sort of like, all right, I'm fully on Team Aegon now. We're kind of binding, and that'll probably set us up into season 4 with them sort of being more closely aligned. Isolated, I really like that. But it also kind of ties a little bit back into the larger problem of the show for me, where we've had this whole redemption arc for Aegon this season, and we have fun reveling in Tom Glencarney's really wonderful, amazing performance. And yet we haven't really reckoned with like the fact that like in season 1 I think it's stated, but at least very much heavily implied, that Aegon's like a rapist who's
that's very clear.
Like raping women, and there's never really a reckoning with that. And so we get this whole sequence of then the season of him suffering and coming to learn to be better, but then not really addressing that as a point. And then we have this whole other stuff of like, look at this emotional Rehneyra who's gone full fascist. And then we sort of revel in Aegon's sort of fun camp performance. And it's this like, oh, look, we're going to celebrate this guy who we're going to just sort of yada yada, don't really think about him being a rapist before. And like, he's got his groove back now. And he's doing better. Versus like Rehneyra's like, she's terrible and a fascist and awful because she having emotions over here. And it it rubs me the wrong way, especially in a show that, again, season 1 was about how women are dismissed, and the show is essentially about, not only was, we've talked about before, the show is not just about patriarchy and misogyny, it's about many, many things like class dynamics and, you know, bloodlines and religion and all of these power structures. But in large part, the show seemed to focus in season 1 on misogyny. And then this season to kind of like reinforce misogynistic narratives of like, let's just give an easy redemption to the man character and have some fun with him, even though he's a really sexual assaulting piece of shit, and just excuse that, or at least sort of narratively downplay it, and then have fun with Rehneyra, like being the mad queen, hysterical woman, you know what I mean? And so, yeah,
it really, I've been kind of puzzling over what exactly the difference is going on, and I think that you're explaining a lot of it, which makes sense to me, of like, why am I having fun watching Aegon do things? I think part of it is that they are almost always giving him someone to like punch sideways at, or like punch up at right now, where like you know, Rehneyra seems to be punching down often, is what it feels like. Maybe that's part of it. Like, yeah, I don't know. I also wish that we were somehow reckoning a little bit more with not only the fact that Aegon is a known rapist, but like a known adulterer in King's Landing, to the point that I believe the implication was made that he's had multiple bastard children, and that some of them are in fighting pits that he then goes and drinks at, and like watches the children hurt each other and kill. Right. Like, yeah, I find it a bit mystifying to see where season 1 Aegon has gotten to here. And that like, and I think maybe part of my reaction to this episode is that I did not think that we were meant to be watching Rehneyra have like her own Cersei origin story basically throughout all of this. But it's like, oh, suddenly this has turned into like, if Joffrey was on one side of the war and Cersei was on the other. And I'm like, I thought we were doing something different here.
This is, of course, a Cast of Kings, a Decoding TV podcast. Please don't forget, if you want to support the show, consider becoming a paid subscriber at decodingtv.com, where you can get ad-free episodes of the show, as well as bonus episodes when we do them. But of course, this week we are going to have our bonus episode here on the main feed, so make sure you get your thoughts into @acastofkings@gmail.com. But let us start our Tumbleton conversation with Ulf the White, literally lording over other people in a kitchen. He's openly mocking the Targaryens, demanding unlimited ale, and generally being a societal menace until he passes out in a privy. So what do you think of all of this Ulf stuff going on here, Kim?
I felt very justified in my dislike of Ulf in this episode, where I was like, see, it's never going to be enough for that guy. Like, give a mouse a cookie type of energy. Like, what are you doing in the kitchen, harassing these people, like getting a little handsy with the serving people, just being like volatile. I kind of like got the quick sense of like, oh, people are like afraid of him, as they should be.
He's a dragon rider,
he's a dragon rider, and he's also like an open turncloak. Like, there's a version of this story where not a version of this story, but like in this universe, being a kinslayer, being a turncloak is like a devastating label to need to carry with you for the rest of your life. And so like the fact that Ulf is just kind of reveling in it, that he's excited about it, you know, his line reading of bitch was like really got me a little. We heard bitch and cunt, like really, you know, really thrown in the faces of some people, which I was like, oh yes, thank you for reminding me of the world that we're in, where those are the worst things you could call someone, especially a man. But I felt like it was just dead on in line with like what they've been doing with his character to have this setup for the battle be that he is too high on his own supply to actually function as an effective dragon rider. And when they like I want to say like pretty soon into Ormond kind of panicking about like, where is he? Where is he? I was like, check the bathrooms. Like,
yeah, right.
Like,
yeah.
I'm pretty sure he drank himself into unconsciousness somewhere.
And we also got like a penis nudity shot there too.
Oh, did we?
Maybe I'm wrong, but I think when Ormond finds him, like in the
he's definitely pantsless.
Yeah, I think we get to see his dick. Which, like, again, I'm not a prude. I don't care, but it's like, all right, cool. Did we like? I appreciate the equal opportunity nudity for not just women and men in this, but for men in the show. But it's like there's clearly a weird like crassness to it that I was like, all right, yeah, sure, yeah, fine.
That's so funny. I did not notice at all.
Maybe I'm misremembering.
I watched the episode twice, but I also probably wasn't.
Maybe I was just looking for his dick. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I just imagined it. Enhance.
I want to see Ulf's little butt.
Yeah. Maybe I'm just making that up, but yeah.
No, I believe you. And it does feel like the exact place where they would put some more male nudity for the sake of it.
Yeah. Well, again, it's fine. But yeah, I agree with you here on everything with Ulf. I have been on the kind of Ulf train this season. I will admit. Like,
how did you feel?
I mean, like, I think you're right. I don't know what I was reacting to with Ulf that I liked the previous episodes was this sort of class sense with him of like, look, he's being mistreated because he's looked down upon by Daemon and Rehneyra, and I kind of found that interesting about him trying to humanize himself and just like wanting his ale and stuff with Rehneyra and everyone. And I found that to be interesting. And then we get here where he's just kind of messy and all over the place.
Yeah.
In a way that I feel bad because I feel like I'm just hating on this episode, and I'm really trying not to just hate on the episode. I'm trying to find goodness where I can here. So I do apologize if listeners find me a bit like, wow, Jessie just really just hating on the show. But I don't know. There's just a thread here that maybe I was just misreading where I'm like, look, Ulf is not a great guy, but at least has some level of like communal ties that he had with the folks in King's Landing that he was like, I want to try and get these people off. Like, hey, Rehneyra, can you give me a pardon? Like, there's some level of like, hey, like, let's just be bros, you know, that I can respect, even if it is a little bit like bros being bros sort of culture in sort of an alehouse. It's an honor in and of itself to a degree. Whereas here he's just like, again, getting handsy, violent, arrogant, sexist, and just kind of like fucking up his own thing here to the point where, just to skip ahead, just sort of wrap out our story with him without needing to return to it, is like he ultimately betrays not only Rehneyra, but Ormond here, which just seems nihilistic and kind of dumb, which again, maybe fits his character. He's not exactly the most strategic guy, but it's like, all right, you're just going to have no allies whatsoever. And I have an idea of where I think they'll take his character next season that we can talk about in our bonus episode, so I won't get into it here. But just in this episode, just feels like, all right, well, this guy's just all over the place. And I get he's resentful at Ormond for beating him when he finds him. And not that I appreciate like someone putting hands on somebody else, and Ormond is not exactly a great guy, but like to a degree, I'd be like, Ormond has a right to be a little pissed at you here in a way that I feel like Rehneyra somewhat didn't in some of her reactions to him in earlier in the season, and so he's just sort of like lashing out at everybody. Like, again, Daemon's mistreatment of Ulf and Rhaenyra's mistreatment of Ulf were not as justified, instead of just coming out of a place of like, we're better than you because we're Targaryens, do what we say. Whereas Ormond has a little bit more of like, we had a plan, man, what are you doing? You had one job. And not following through. So yeah, it's just a weirdly frustrating storyline with him that, like, again, I feel like lost the nuance of his character where, like, again, I don't think he was perfect. But I found there's some interesting class discussion here that gets flattened in these sequences.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely clocked the moment when Ormond like spits out the word baseborn at him during this like beating, and I think that like that probably got to Ulf more than anything. Plus you see Ulf look and notice the high tower soldiers noticing him, and so yeah, I think that Ulf just could not stand the fact that, oh, this guy who just spent all this time buttering me up and supposedly offering me lordship is actually at the end of the day only ever going to think of me as a baseborn bastard and only ever going to, you know, put me beneath even his like household guard soldiers. I found it, yeah, I was like, yep, I see why Ulf, and not to mention, like, I don't know, have you ever woken up after passing out drunk? Like, you're not exactly sober.
Yeah,
So the fact that Ulf like drunkenly got on his dragon and then just said, I'm gonna commit mass murder, was gnarly.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I don't know. I liked the stuff with Ulf throughout this episode. I thought it was a successful setup for this battle just taking so many twists and turns that the various soldiers and leaders could not have possibly seen coming. Although I was also like, it took Daemon way too long to figure out that Ulf was not with Silverwing.
Yeah.
I was like, why are you just now
they get that out.
thinking that? And then Ulf like got over to his dragon pretty quickly.
I was like, I literally said when I was watching him, so like, did we teleport here? How did he get outside? Like the battle is going on. How did he teleport, get over to the hill, like all the way over there in like what, 5 minutes?
Like, yeah, there were a few of those things that popped up for me in this episode. Another like, I guess I'm supposed to suspend my disbelief here moment in this episode for me was again Massaria getting severance, because I was like, we've just spent all of these episodes talking about how there's no money.
Yeah.
What do you mean you have enough gold to buy her a house and servants and like all this stuff in Pentos? Maybe that was a lie, but it felt like there are some little inconsistency quirks that sometimes pull me out of it.
Well, speaking of which, meanwhile, Ormond Hightower has been staging diabolical defense plans, including using town children as human shields. Daemon and Gwaine remain horrified and skeptical of Ormond's leadership and try their own plot of parlaying for peace using Corlys, but Daemon shoots this down, eager for bloodshed. So I will say, this was something that I did like. We touched upon the element that I didn't like, which is the kids thing, which is like no one in Tumbleton is gonna react against like using kids. Like we don't see anyone like being like, don't take our kids. Like there's none of that stuff, and it's again just put upon like, well, it's not on Ormond for taking the kids and putting them in these positions. It will be on Rehneyra if she kills them. So we've discussed a little bit of that already, but that was a little bit of a frustrating like piece here that again feels at odds with how these sort of not only like that would work on that level, but also as a element of this world of it would be seen as like, oh yeah, she has a right to sack a city as like the rightful queen sort of thing. So it's an odd sort of piece there. But the element that I did like was Gwaine sort of suing for peace and bringing Corlys and this confrontation with Daemon.
Yeah.
I thought all of this discussion with Corlys too was really, really, really good. And I think kind of hits at a point that I've liked this show for doing of like, what do you want? Do you just want to show power for power's sake, to just showcase like my strength, which is very much a Daemon thing of like might makes right with him? Or do you want to be the ruler here? And you have a way here to a path forward of make Darren sort of the warden of, you know, the Hightower area, and you still get to be overall ruler, but it sort of like allows this sort of negotiation with, you know, Rehneyra being a female ruler, and Daemon sort of just shooting it down, be like, no, I just want absolute strength, absolute control. I demand this. And this, you know, I think it's still the showrunners kind of tying into a fascist might makes right ideology, but it still fits within, I think, what brings more true to this world, which is the sort of feudal monarchy rule of like, no, I want absolute rule. I will brook no sort of claimants to the throne otherwise, even in a sort of vassal capacity. And so I loved all of this, and I thought the discussion was really good. I thought Gwaine being very desperate was really good. The only silly thing here was Gwaine giving up Corlys as a prisoner for this so easily. I thought was a little bit like, okay, I feel like you lost your bargaining chip there in a haphazard way. But in terms of discussion and character beats between the three of them, Gwaine, Darren, and Gwaine / Darren, Corlys, and Daemon, I thought was really good.
Yeah, I really loved that scene too. Like the tension of it, the staging, and like all of the filming angles where you very much felt like this conversation can go sideways any moment. And same thing, like I had like a reaction when Daemon like all of a sudden had his hands on Gwaine.
I was like, oh, we're killing Gwaine here. Damn. I was worried for him. Yeah.
I was really worried for him too. And I was feeling in that moment how much I've come to really appreciate Gwaine as a character, as like a pretty solid voice of reason.
He is like the moral character in this show. Like, he's not perfectly moral. He still does his own stuff with the Hightowers is tied up in it, but he is the most moral. Him and Darren, I think, are probably the most moral characters in the show. Right.
Although it did, again, baffle me a little bit to show them just say nothing about the children.
Yeah.
Like, even in private, like it felt like we're supposed to assume that they are already like, Ormond sucks and is the worst, so this is just more of the same from him type of dealio. But I don't know. And again, maybe this speaks to me just being in a state of mind now where it's not as fun for me to watch miserable days at the Misery Factory of like, I just sometimes crave like one person even trying to do the right thing in some of these settings, which again, I realize is not quite the world that George R. R. Martin has laid out for us. But I think that it's feeling to me like the balance is a little too skewed towards like, everything's really awful and corrupted and there's nothing to be done about it type of energy.
If people go and watch, I made a video on my YouTube channel about Night of the Seven Kingdoms, and I made this point about George R. R. Martin where it's like, George R. R. Martin is realist, but he's not nihilist. He doesn't believe that people are just inherently awful pieces of shit who are only going to do self-serving things. He's sort of looking at like, these systems incentivize people to choose selfish things, but like people generally care about each other on some level. And that's kind of what A Night of the Seven Kingdoms was about. And here though, like, again, that nuance is lost to kind of end up being like, yeah, no, people just are kind of pieces of shit. And I feel like there's a little bit more nihilism in the show than even A Night of the Seven Kingdoms or George R. R. Martin's writing itself. Like, George R. R. Martin is not necessarily like optimistic like Tolkien would be. In like this sort of like higher belief in the greater good of the universe, or God in Tolkien's case. But he's also not like, I'm just gonna go full Joker, everything sucks and everything is meaningless now. You know what I mean? Whereas this show kind of, I think, leans that way, unfortunately, in a very, there's like an essentialist nature, I think, to the show. Bio-essentialist in terms of gender and essentialist nature in terms of like systems that I don't love that the show gets into. And it's worth mentioning here, while I do like these sequences with Darren and Gwaine sort of having a moral center, it is odd to me that like Darren does nothing in this episode. Like, he sort of waffles about like, I need to be brave, I need to be out there, I need to get on my dragon, and then Gwaine sort of stops him at some point, and Gwaine himself is sort of out of the battle for most of it anyways too. And it's like, okay, these two are just going to be like doing their own thing in the midst of all this. And it felt weirdly frustrating just constantly be like, I need to do something. I guess not. So.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that we were rehashing that same. It feels like Darren's been like spinning his wheels literally since we met him in Tumbleton. And I really, really loved his introduction. I thought like him being forced to kill Kat's brother was like a fascinating kind of like jumping off point for him to now be a king. And then it's like, oh, we're just kind of watching him say like, I don't want to do this, and also I want to do the right thing, but I'm not going to do either. I thought him being knighted by Ormond was really interesting in this scene too. Like, it feels like, sure, him saying like, I can't die a craven was him attempting to live up to this moniker of Darren the Daring that Ormond gave him. James Norton as Ormond too was just like killing it throughout this whole season. I do think that he was really successful as like effectively a one-season villain. But I also found myself being like, oh, he's actually not going to do anything. Like, not both not get on his dragon, not escape. We don't see him at the end of the episode. So like, we're left with this mystery heading into season 4 of like, what exactly happened to Darren and Tumbleton. And yeah, I felt like it was a little bit of a missed opportunity too, for what I think was a really good character introduction this season, and great performance. I think his name is Benjamin something. I really like the kid who plays Darren, though.
He's great. He's great.
But yes, I was like, I feel like I'm hearing a lot of the same thoughts come out of you. I want to see again, like some new creative choice being made, or some consequence for the lack of a choice. Yeah.
Well, let us get into the actual battle itself. The battle begins. We see the Winter Wolves breach the walls, and Daemon uses Craxes to break through the main gate, burning 2 children in the process. While Roddy the Ruin hacks his way to Ormond to the death, and has a really joyful time getting burned to death there. Darren and Gwaine argue over helping versus escaping, as we discussed, but are swept up in the fight before a choice can be made. And as we also discussed, when Ulf is finally discovered and humiliated, it's the final straw. He unleashes Silverwings, Dragonfire on both Targaryen army and the people of Tumbleton, and the battle is technically won for Rehneyra, but at what cost? So yes, a bunch of quick little things here to discuss. Let's talk, I think, first about the Winter Wolves. I did really enjoy, as I mentioned, seeing a version of the Starks and the North, as he says, that was less honorable. There's that one moment where a kid hits him and he just straight up hits and kills the kid. I thought that was cool to see a bit of a gradation of the typically honorable White Wolf stuff. And I loved his sort of joy at getting to die in a big bit of Dragonfire after killing Ormond. I thought that was a great whole sequence. And I did also like Ormond getting done in by like his gag reflex at the blood was also really great. So like a whole sequence here that I really enjoyed with these Winter Wolves overall. My only 2 negatives that I would toss out there with it is one, just a logistical thing where my partner and I were watching the episode and we're like, how are they going to get over the walls? They don't have ladders. And then all of a sudden they had ladders. So like we have that shot of them like running up and we don't see any ladders as they're running up to the, at least maybe I'm misremembering, but I didn't see them at least. So if they were there, they weren't clearly shown. And then all of a sudden they were when they got to the wall. So I was like, oh, that feels odd that we're going to spend all this time of like, look at these arrows hitting them. And then they suddenly have ladders. So that's just a logistical thing. It's whatever. The other one that I'll mention, just because we've touched upon it so much in this show, is the way that Ormond is killed is our White Wolf sort of sticking him up the butt with the sword and being like, oh, you're getting fucked by the North. Which, again, fits some of the crass humor of Game of Thrones and this world building, but just coupled with the, as we've discussed endlessly, so I won't go to it, the frivolous sexual assaults in this show that we've had all season. It's like we almost went an episode without a frivolous sexual assault joke, and it kind of portrayed it as like, look, it's funny because it's happening to a guy. Like when it happens to women, it's horrible, but we're not going to focus on the interiority of the woman getting assaulted, but we'll show it as horrible. But when a man gets sexually assaulted in his death, it's a crass joke. And I'm like, okay, this is just leaning into problems with depictions of sexual assault all around. And it's like, maybe for some people, maybe it's not a big deal, but for me, it was like, and I'm not prudish or like offended by it, but I'm just like, okay, sure. That, just to put it on the sexual assault frustration pile.
Yeah. I was less jazzed to see Roddy the Ruin. I guess his name's Roddy the Ruin, but to see them have like really just intense bloodlust and seemingly little else. Maybe especially with like everything that Rehneyra is doing in this episode, it's pretty gnarly to like watch this battle unfold and realize that like all the people who are fighting for Rehneyra might not even realize like the type of ruler that they're now defending. That they're, you know, they feel so righteous in their drive to put down the high towers, and I'm sitting here being like, y'all don't even know what's happening. And yeah, I was like, I really hoped that he was not going to kill that kid, and then he swings the axe in that poor kid's face, and then a split second later, an archer lets off the arrow that lights the trench around Tumbleton, which I thought was really cool. But I also, like, upon a rewatch, I was sitting there being like, bro, for the sake of murdering a child, you just missed your chance to stop that from happening. I was like, why? Like, again, I guess because I'm supposed to know that war is bloody and cruel and people, I don't know, get lost up in like the the beatings and I don't know. I did not love that. Because I also had this reaction in the Bells episode, which a lot of Tumbleton was reminding me of the Bells, which was the penultimate episode of Game of Thrones. It's the stacking of King's Landing. And similarly, like watching the Starks rush into King's Landing and just like rape and pillage like it was nobody's business. I also felt a little bit of like a reader betrayal in that moment too. And it happened to me again with this, where it's like, maybe it would be too boring to have like the men of the North always be some like beacon of honor. But I don't know. I really think that this world could use that. And it again felt strange to me that like almost every faction of the army had some like, fuck it, we're just gonna like kill as many people as possible, especially given the setup of Rehneyra trying to say, don't make a monster out of me. And then Daemon, it just felt kind of like half-assed. Like it felt like we got halfway towards this point of like, we should try and do everything possible to save lives. And then all the characters just threw that out the window at kind of the same time. And it just was a bummer. To talk about what I love getting a daytime battle.
Yeah, we can actually see everything for once in a battle.
See everything, not a lick of fog or a cloud in the sky. And I liked, siege ladders, boiling oil, like all of the
boiling oil was wild. I was like, oh man, ooh, gnarly. Yeah.
I feel like I've heard of that, or like I knew that that's often a part of battlements warfare. Yes, but I don't know that I've ever seen it executed so well. So I really enjoyed that.
One other thing too that to touch upon is the Hugh Hammer of it all. We see him sort of running through the battlefield against orders. He wasn't supposed to be there. I believe he's supposed to be back guarding King's Landing, I think Daemon says at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And we see him find his wife's body and him crying over her. Again, we'll discuss some book changes there in our bonus episode, but I'll mention it here. Love that we're getting a fridged wife. Gotta fridge the wife storyline. Again, just another sort of just tropey place for women characters of like, oh, she's the wife who's like, you did it for you broke bad, Hugh, and now you need to realize it was all about you the entire time, and then she dies because now we need to have a fridged wife storyline. So I was like, okay, tropey. Everything with Hugh Hammer this season has just been tropey.
And again, dies presumably when I rewatch the scene, it looks like a high tower soldier is coming in and sees her and like grabs her and throws her at the Stark soldiers who are also coming in to like try to fight. So I'm like, okay, is the implication here that like the Starks, or again, they're not Starks necessarily, but that like
Stark aligned, I guess.
Yeah. That Stark delegation basically are the ones that killed her. I found it a little too convenient that like Daemon just happened to see Hugh running by and yelling, "Cat, where is my wife?
Where's my wife? I need to have angst."
I was like, but again, someone needed to know that Hugh had abandoned his post and that's the reason he was seeking after it.
I will say we do get a really good Daemon battle with what's his name, Roxton, John Roxton, right? Is his full name? That whole duking it out was real cool, and I see Daemon getting the shit beat out of him, and Roxton just like, I'm like, Roxton was about to kill him, but for Hugh kind of fucking things up. So
Ulf, right?
Oh, sorry, Ulf.
Yeah, Ulf comes in. Yeah, I thought that was a great fight, very well choreographed. I was also getting a little worried for Daemon there, or just at least like his eye. I was like,
parallel to Aemond there. Yeah,
exactly.
It's almost as if they're narrative parallels in the entire show. What a shock! I say that complimentary. That's a compliment, not a criticism there. So.
I loved Caraxes in this episode too, like having him have to kind of like walk up to the front of the army and then like, you don't need your siege tools, I'm just gonna like poke my neck through.
That was pretty cool. I did like that.
I thought that was so cool. Child murder aside. But that was a really great shot and very smart. And then, it's interesting that Daemon kind of turned into the parallel of Arya and Jon Snow again in like the bells after the sacking. All these kind of shots of him looking a bit like, out of focus and in shock and maybe regretful. I was finding myself being like, okay, what is it that Daemon is feeling here? Is he feeling regret for doing what Corlys said and just trying to kill as many high towers instead of aiming for peace? Is this the first time that he's seen the impact of dragonfire on like women and children as opposed to only soldiers? Like, is he having a reaction to that? Or is he just straight up like looking around and realizing that he has failed miserably in his task of not making Rehneyra look like a monster? And I found it really interesting that Corlys was the one to like bring him out of that fog and be like, Ulf has turned, we're leaving. And like, I would say, as we're not griping, as we were talking about like moral characters, I also think that Corlys has been
he's been solid.
He's been a very solid and like consistent like voice of reason for the most part. Maybe not where bastards are concerned. But I like that he got to come back into the fold in this way again and isn't just being left as some sort of prisoner or like sort of discarded.
I will say that sequence too, where we did see him, where Ulf was sort of burning the Daemon's men, and and Corlys was there.
Yeah,
and he's like, oh shit, and he like runs through. Really cool shot. I will say, like the sense of scale and distance, as we sort of see the dragon come upon him, and he sort of runs off to the side, was really, really well done. Like again, technical aspects of the show are not the problem, and that shot in particular was pretty cool. So. Yeah,
and the other shot that I really remember is Roddy the Ruin when he first gets to like come up the walls, and like that full tracking shot where like maybe they used a crane or something or stitched together stuff, but like the fact that you follow him like from the ground up the ladder over the battlements was so cool.
Yeah, so some cool stuff. And to sort of wrap out the thoughts of this battle, like some bits and bobs within the battle itself that I did not like. But the battle, like leading into the battle, not so much. It's some bits and bobs within the battle I don't love. But as a whole, I think this is a really cool sequence. So like in terms of a battle and a spectacle, I think this is right up there as one of Game of Thrones, the franchise's best battle sequences. Maybe not at an emotional investment level, as we've discussed, but in terms of just the way it's displayed is really, really cool. So let us wrap out the episode with the last little sequence here, where Rehneyra returns to the castle after her time at the Sept and is surprised by Elaida calling her to Helena's room. We see the window thrown open and a glimpse of Helena impaled on the spikes at the base of the Red Cube's tower. Rehneyra is cold in the face of her death, looking once at the embroidery of herself by Helena, seated on a bleeding, fiery throne, before closing the window, and thus concludes House of the Dragon Season 3. So yes, what did you think about Helena's suicide here? And obviously, listeners, content warning for this whole show. We've been talking about sexual assault, but suicide I know is a particularly touchy one, so just content warning on that front.
Yeah, I found it... I don't know how I was expecting them to show Helena's death, because I'll just say it's not a surprise that Helena dies by presumably jumping out of this window. Although the book kind of left enough room for me to be like, oh, are they going to show someone pushing her or like contriving this in some way? And I don't know. I found myself not as impacted by it, but maybe because again, this episode, I found myself like 30 minutes in kind of like wanting to escape, like wanting to not be watching what I'm watching, which doesn't often happen to me. And so by the time that like the battle was happening and I realized, like, again, with just the timing left in the episode of like, oh, this is going to be like the final note they're going off on again for the whole season. I don't know. I think that the buildup to her death was really was like really effective, and I really enjoyed spending the time that we did spend with Helena more this season. I just again was I think I was kind of taken aback by realizing that the emotional beat of her death was going to be me reacting to Rehneyra's lack of reaction, if that makes sense. Like, it's like having Rehneyra show no sadness, no barely even like shock, like, and instead to see Rehneyra be so entirely consumed and focused with like her own image, literally, her own power and sense of rule. Yeah, just was again like not quite the tone I was expecting to feel by the end of the episode. And part of me is like, I think Helena deserves to be grieved fully
in the show.
In the show, I suppose. I mean, yeah, I guess maybe that's just going to be our job. But like, I feel very sensitive around suicide storylines. I myself lived for years with passive suicidal ideation without realizing that that's what it was. That like, there's a difference between, you know, wishing you had never been born, or like wishing that something might happen to you, or, you know, just being generally like very unattached to being alive, and how that can move into more active suicidal ideation. And like watching Helena effectively go through that this season, yeah, it was really heartbreaking, again, which is the purpose of her story here at the end. But yeah, I thought that having the device of her embroidering her own death into like this story, which also part of me is wondering if maybe in season 4 we're gonna see that like this opening credits tapestry embroidery somehow includes that, or like is somehow linked to like the idea that Helena was also like recording history a bit while she was alive. Yeah, I really liked that. And yeah, but that's the other thing that left me kind of like baffled by this, was like only checking in for Alicent in the whole episode at the end, and like to see her like, oh, she's in a camp. Where is she? Oh, and I was just like, like,
and the butterflies, of course, tying into the title of George R. R. Martin's blog post last season of "Beware the Butterflies." I think was very much. I think Martin saw the tea leaves. The prophecy was foretold. Yeah, I will have more to say about this in our bonus episode, because I think part of my frustration with the Helena stuff here kind of has to do with comparisons to the book. So I'll save that a little bit more for a bonus episode. What I will say here is I actually don't dislike the way it's shot and filmed. I've been speaking this whole season about spectacleizing moments of violence that like it's hard to like be an anti-war film, for example, when you're showing war, because just by nature of showing war it makes it look cool. And a similar thing happens with sexual assault, as we talked about this season. Not that it like sort of is like, oh, sexual assault is great, but it's sort of voyeuristic spectacleizing of assault. And here I like that the suicide happens off screen, and we just sort of get the her death moment, and we get to see that. And so I appreciate that, but I agree with you that since we don't get any grieving for her by Rehneyra or Alicent, even though Alicent sort of has like a sense, I guess it feels like, of what's going on given the butterfly sequence, or at least it's sort of meant to symbolically reference that. Usually the power of not showing a sequence like this is then showing the effect and ramifications emotionally on other characters, and the lack of Rehneyra having any emotion sort of deadens that a little bit. It reminds me of a good comparison that I have is Avatar: The Last Airbender. In the animated version of the show, we have the genocide of the airbenders in that show. And we never see that happen. But what we do see is Aang, we get to see flashbacks of Aang like having a happy life with the airbenders, and then we cut to the dead bodies of the people who were killed in the genocide, and you see Aang's grief at that. And it's that grief and that juxtaposition of happiness versus death and the grief within that creates the emotional resonance. Here we get close to that, but we don't get the emotional resonance. And as a result, it kind of doesn't fully land as I think as powerfully as it could have. But I think, again, that's part of the point of like them wanting to show Rehneyra as not being emotionally tethered to anything. But then that ties into all the other criticisms we've had of Rehneyra so far this episode. So yeah, I am mixed on Helena's death just in the context of the episode itself. I think it's shot well, done well. I think it's handled in a responsible way, in a way that this show has not necessarily shown to other similarly very touchy issues. But I also have, it's also tied into other stuff that I have issues with, like Rehneyra. And then again, I'll save it for the bonus episode. Frustrations with the overall handling of why Helena chooses to die by suicide, which is, I think, gonna have to come rapidly within my thoughts from the book. So I'll save it for bonus episode.
Yeah. There was one more detail in this sequence that I really liked, which was like the embroidery, this visual that Rehneyra is looking at of herself on the throne that seems like it's bleeding. So like, of course we know the broader implications of like, if the throne cuts you and you bleed, and Rehneyra knows that as well. So obviously like that has probably come to mind for her. But like behind the throne, there's also like a dragon hand kind of like separated, like as if like a dragon is being dismembered, and then hands of other people kind of like reaching out. And then I was like, there's something about the pattern of the stitching that was like sticking in my mind. And I'm pretty sure that what Helena did, or what they're trying to have us imply that Helena did, is that the way that the blood is outlined on Rehneyra sitting on the throne looks just like that main building in the model of Valyria. And also like in the opening credits for the first season, they had that kind of like stone vision of it with like blood flowing everywhere. So I also think like there's maybe something in this embroidery that's trying to tie basically like that Rhaenyra's actions are like recreating the results of the doom, but here in Westeros, that like she is overseeing death and destruction to like a severe degree, and that's what Helena's interpretation, or like that's what Helena's dragon dreams were telling her. And so again, the fact that Rehneyra is in such a headspace that she like looked at that and was simply like, I'm not going to worry about that, and I'm just going to close the door and everything's fine.
Gotta focus on being fantasy Hitler right now. Well, all that being said, this brings us to the end of the episode. Any final thoughts, Kim? Or do you want to save for a bonus episode we'll have in a few days?
Yeah, I feel like, again, this was a big episode. I definitely want to hear from listeners about like thoughts that you have on the season as a whole. I will definitely be able to share a lot more details and insights into stuff that I'm kind of waffling on in our bonus episode this week, with being able to dig more into like the book comparisons. And yeah, but overall, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to watch the show and then talk to you about it. Yeah. Like, it's so nice that, again, I can have this container for all of these feelings and reactions and responses. And so it's been a joy.
Yeah. Well, that does bring us to the end of the episode, but don't forget to be on the lookout for that bonus episode later this week, where we'll give our thoughts on the entire season as a whole, as well as some book to show comparisons for the finale. Please make sure to send us in your feedback or any thoughts you have at acastofkings@gmail.com. Try to get those in by Wednesday. We'll probably be recording Wednesday. Kim and I will figure out an exact time soon, but if you get them in by Wednesday, then we'll have a good chance to make sure we read them on the show. And on that note, also don't forget to send in your topics and thoughts and discussions for Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, for next week. You have until Monday for that. So get those in by Monday if you want us to talk about your email about Lord of the Rings. We'd love to have that happen because we're very excited, and I think will be a nice change of pace tonally for us after the season in the the miserable factory on miserable fantasy world.
There's some good in the world.
There
and
is
it's worth fighting for.
Yay! So yes, get those in. Also, please consider getting video versions of this podcast at youtube.com/Decoding TV. And even more importantly, if you want to support the show and other shows on the Decoding TV network, please consider becoming a paid subscriber at decodingtv.com, where you can get ad-free episodes of this and other Decoding TV podcasts. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you later this week for a House of the Dragon Season 3 wrap-up. Yay!
Bye.